Ja, und wir steigen mit einem literarischen Panel in die Debatte ein. Es wird darum gehen, worüber wir eigentlich reden, wenn wir über europäische Literatur reden, darum, ob wir uns in einer Tradition verorten als Schreibende und wenn ja, in welcher, oder auch, wie die Literaturen in den verschiedenen Ecken eigentlich aussehen, wie dieses Schreiben aussieht, wie verschieden es ist oder was das Verbindende daran ist. Und ich habe das Vergnügen, die Teilnehmer des ersten Panels jetzt vorzustellen. Ich freue mich sehr, dass Oksana Sabuschko bei uns ist und möchte Sie gerne auf die Bühne bitten. Janet Teller aus Dänemark, Laleş aus der Türkei und Goran Vojnović aus Slowenien.
Eine nicht ganz leichte Aufgabe. Wir haben jetzt eine gute Stunde Zeit, meine Damen und Herren, und ich freue mich natürlich, wenn wir mit den Schriftstellerinnen und Schriftstellern auch gemeinsam ins Gespräch kommen. Das heißt, wir werden Sie jetzt ein bisschen hören zu einzelnen Aspekten und dann lade ich Sie herzlich ein, mit uns ins Gespräch zu kommen. Oksana Sabuschko, ich denke, das sollten wir ganz zu Anfang von Ihnen hören. Mit welchem Gefühl sind Sie aus der Ukraine ausgereist diesmal?
Oksana.
Oksana.
It's Oksana, for the interpreter, yeah. Well, you know, I don't have any ready-made statement, and thank you.
Wir haben ein Fiepen auf dem Kopfhörer.
Is it okay?
Ich glaube, jetzt funktioniert es. Nein?
Ja.
Immer noch ein Fiepen? Kann man da technisch was tun?
Can I be heard? Yeah. Fine. Okay. If you permit, since I don't have any ready-made statements, I mean, I've done my homework, but I'd rather leave it alone since it is just 1 hour we have for 5 speakers. And we have these magnificent subjects which would call for hours and hours, well, just to be outlined. Answering your question, may I kind of reformulate it to how am I feeling now, right now? I must say a little bit schizophrenic. Because there is a reality, a very severe reality now happening in my country, ringing the bell for the whole world and for our entire civilization. And there is a shield of words covering, wrapping the tragedy, reshaping it, disguising it, making a number of nice or not that nice stories on it to be served in media and to be talked into, while on the other end there is human blood still. And here we come to the question what actually literature does for the reality. How literature helps to create the fake reality. How literature helps to destroy life more than once. Because if you look back at the history of the 20th century until now, the history of all the totalitarianisms in Europe, Hitler's, Stalin's, now Putin's, has been to a considerable extent the history... Okay,
es ist wunderbar, dass Sie gleich hier ins Eingemachte gehen und ausholen, aber ich würde doch wissen, Sie sagten anfangs, Sie fühlten sich... Bitte?
So what was that?
Die Handys, die könnten ein Faktor sein, der hier verstört. thought.
So you...
Okay, to tell about the situation, you mentioned you feel kind of schizophrenic being here. So tell us very personal, not in terms of Ukrainian history, but very personal. How do you feel about traveling out of your country right now?
A very personal thing is that I'm very much impressed with the story just told by Mr. Steinmeier. His introductory essay into the Ukrainian literature, the history of the Ukrainian literature on Shevchenko and Gogol was very impressive, and I really appreciated that. But to me it's one of the examples how literature and history of literature can be misused as well. So that's been the point I've been trying to make. We live now in the world of the staged politics, and Ukraine since 5 months have been living in the nightmare of a very, very well prepared reality show in which all the pretext for the Russian invasion are staged and fake, including the one on the Russian language allegedly being banned. It was never been banned, it's just a fake scandal, faked by the fake so-called nationalist party whose only business for years have been to provide the picture for the Russian TV, which is not very far from Goebbelsian propaganda these days. And these things are very much troublesome, because we are all hungry for good stories, and it's been a good story what Mr. Steinmeier told us. The only problem is that the reality is a terrorist war now conducted by Russia on the Ukrainian territory. And when we do have people tortured, people murdered, people killed by the trained commandos sent from abroad, when we have people with their bellies ripped, people drowned alive, people found tortured to death with their mouths closed with scotch, this is the end of words. This is the end of the dialogue. This is the end of any attempts to understand the other part, because it is the end of understanding. It is evil. And I believe, thank you, I believe that we must think there is always a danger, you know, about this understanding. It is writer's business, yes, to understand everyone, including Hitler or Stalin or Putin, because for writer, they are all characters. And as a writer, you are supposed to understand, well, maybe not to understand, to comprehend your characters, to try to figure out what their motives, however evil, might be. But there should be a certain set of values, moral values, I mean, which draw the lines not to be surpassed. Otherwise, we may end up with discussions in which there is 5 minutes for Hitler and 5 minutes for a Jew.
Liebe Oksana, Frank-Walter Steinmeier hat schon gesagt, die politischen Grenzen Europas entsprechen nicht den kulturellen Grenzen. Und auch die Ukraine hat ja eine unglaublich multikulturelle Vergangenheit, werde ich jetzt gehört, ja, besser. Haben Sie den Anfang mitbekommen? Ich sprach über die politischen europäischen Grenzen, die nicht den kulturellen Grenzen entsprechen, wie Frank-Walter Steinmeier eingangs sagte. Und gerade wenn man sich die Ukraine als einen Vielvölkerstaat anschaut mit einer sehr europäischen Geschichte, Noch meine Frage, mit der Bitte um eine kurze Antwort, weil wir viele Panelisten heute hier zu Gast haben. Fühlen Sie sich ein wenig europäisch? Sie persönlich?
I've always felt Ukrainian and therefore I've always felt European.
Janne Teller. Vielen Dank. Janne Teller, ich erlaube mir mal das Du. Wir haben viele Lesungen bereits zusammen gehabt und wir haben schon eingangs von Antje Rávic Strubel gehört, dass du unglaublich viel unterwegs warst. Du lebst auch größtenteils heutzutage in den USA, in New York, hast viel in Afrika gelebt und gearbeitet. Was würdest du sagen von außen betrachtet? Denn diese Distanz braucht es ja manchmal, um die eigene Identität zu reflektieren. Was macht dich europäisch außer deinem Pass?
Well, yeah, that is what I tried to address in the essay that Antje Strubel mentioned, Europe, who are you? And what I feel we have in common in Europe is a joy of what I call subtle quality, in English, die zweite Qualität auf Deutsch. I mean, we don't need necessarily to be the biggest or the loudest or fastest, which is more the American way. We don't need all the gold, the glitter, the flowery decorated. It's more the Arabic way. So we like the subtle qualities in our crystal glasses, parquet floors, and the paintings. It's in the food and the way we behave, I think. And if somehow we were to adopt that more as a common identity rather than the descriptive norms of how do we eat, which language do we speak, which religion, how women behave, do we celebrate Christmas or not. But if we then would have this ideal of sub-quality, or it could be something but an ideal that's something everybody can join in on, no matter from where in Europe they come from or from outside of Europe, and you can come in and become part of Europe.
Kann man das so ein bisschen auch mit einem gewissen Understatement vielleicht übersetzen? Ist es auch das, diese diskrete Qualität, oder worin besteht die genau?
No, I don't think one needs another term. I spent a long time finding that term, so we don't need to make it another one. But of course what it is understood is that yeah, we like what is subtle. We don't need to brag. I mean, when we're at our best, there might be differences, but we like the inherent quality. But the thing is, it's an ideal. It's not something that's always there. It's something to live up to. It's in all our castles and our sculptures, all what we are proud of. And actually it's also in the philosophy and the ethics of Europe, the thing of treating others how you would like to be treated yourself, and that we are all born equal. But again, these are values. We don't live up to them ourselves in Europe, but they're very, very good values that we should strive for. And I think, again, if we adopt that as our common identity, then everybody can adopt Europe and be part of Europe. That's what I meant with the comparison with the American dream. You can be American when you adhere to that dream, in the sense whether you're Muslim or Christian or Buddhist or atheist, and no matter if you're black or white or Chinese, you can have that common dream. And that dream ties people together around something. It's not exclusive. And the problem with those static norms that we otherwise use as European identity norms for each country, they exclude others. And that's always something that gives rise to conflict.
Florence, Noiville, ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie eingetroffen sind, ein wenig später. Ich weiß jetzt nicht, ob Sie die Eingangsrede von Frank-Walter Steinmeier mithören konnten. Da ging es unter anderem um die Strahlkraft Europas, die von außen gesehen sehr, sehr groß ist, sehr, sehr hoch ist. Wenn man selbst in Europa lebt, hier aufgewachsen ist, wird diese Strahlkraft oft kaum wahrgenommen. Wie aufregend ist Europa für Sie derzeit und wie strahlend?
Well, thank you. You asked Oksana to begin with to say something personal. So if you allow me, I will start with something personal as well. I'm both at the same time very happy and a bit sad to be here. very happy for obvious reasons to share this panel with you and discuss this crucial matter of Europe, and a bit sad. Why? Because my writer's name is Noiville, as you said, but my name as a married wife is Hirsch, or Hirsch, and this is a German name, and this is a Jewish German name. And Etienne Hirsch, who is the grandfather of my husband, used to work with Jean Monnet. Jean Monnet is one of the fathers of Europe. And he himself had his parents, cousins, sisters deported to Auschwitz. And despite of all that, 7 years later, he worked on the Treaty of the Coal and Steel in 1953. And then on the treaties of Rome, etc., etc. And I could feel in my own family this incredible enthusiasm about the ideal of Europe you were talking about. And recently on France Culture, which is one of the radio channels in France, you could hear some testimonies of the people at that time. And there was such a strength in their dreams, convictions, ideals. And this has gone on from generations to generations in my own families, in many others. But now, of course, like many others, I can see that so many things are reversible. Peace is reversible, currency is reversible. So many people say in Greece, let's go back to the drachma, let's go back to the lira in Italy, etc. Democracy is reversible, etc., etc. So all the things that were so strong and so obvious to all of us has suddenly become terribly fragile. And talking of Jean Monnet, since I was mentioning him, there was this famous line. He said, or he's supposed to have said, if I was to start again, I would start with culture. And I'm completely convinced of that. That is why you mentioned that in my own itinerary, I left business to start again in culture and become first a literary critic at Le Monde and then a writer. So I was also myself convinced that art and literature and culture in general could do something for a better understanding, etc. And I'm working very hard at Le Monde to still do that, which is focus on small languages, not be under the pressure of a dominant culture, which would be the Anglo-American culture, but open up to many other way of thinking and seeing the world through the books. But now I have also come to the conclusion that also this is very fragile, because the newspapers and cultures in general is in a difficult economic situation. And it's not enough. So my point here, if I was to make a point, would be that the following suggestion. It's called Traum, Wirklichkeit, dream and reality. And I think the reality is gloom now, and the dream is not strong enough. So we should really put our strengths together to rehaunt this dream, or revive it, or reinvent it through words, through ideas, and we are the best people to do it, writers, thinkers, etc. So that should be our task, and I have some ideas about civilization and about what should be our guidelines, but I don't want to speak too much.
I am, as you said, one of the youngest here, so for me 10 years is not so little time, as you said, like just a little bit ago you become EU members. It's a third of my life, actually, in the European Union almost. Yes, I think that Slovenia has a problem which we feel very deeply, but I think it's a problem of all the Europe, but the bigger countries are not feeling it the same way. And it's a problem of miscommunication or non-communication. We are here writers, we are dealing with communication, and I think one of the biggest problems of today's Europe is lack of communication. We are speaking a lot, but we are not communicating. And in Slovenia, because we are so small and so unimportant, and because not so many people are speaking Slovenia, not so many people have some interest in what is going on in Slovenia. We don't have no wars, luckily for us. So we have, even when we have this financial crisis, we weren't interested because I think Germans can solve our financial crisis in 5 minutes talk in front of the toilets. Because we are so unimportant. And I think we feel most deeply this European problem. Let me start by saying, because we're all being personal, I will be personal too. My great-grandfather was born in today's Ukraine. He was a Ukrainian in Laleş, which is, my great-grandmother was a Polish. And they moved to today's Bosnia. Just so that a couple of years later, my great-grandfather could be sent to today's Slovenia to fight Italians for Austrians. And just that he could come home, luckily alive, to die in Yugoslavia.
Ich glaube, sowas nennt man eine hybride Identität.
Yes. So I just wanted to say Europe had these identities before. EU didn't invent these European mixed identities. We had them before, but today we have problem we have sort of identity crisis, because when we speak about Europe, we always speak in these geopolitical terms. Europe, as also Mr. Minister greatly said, that it's not the same as like in literature, when of course we can never say European, Ukrainian and Russian literature. Like we said, like if you read in the newspapers, Europe is fighting for Ukraine with Russia, which is something which is for when you speak about literature, or if you speak about football, it's very similar to what we have in literature, when Turkey, Azerbaijan and Israel can be fighting for the European Championship easily. It's also with this literature. But what we are lacking is with this non-communication, these words that we have today, which is very different from what we had when my grandfather was alive. The communication was slow, so you can really communicate slowly, and of course the communication can last for 10 years. Today everything is going fast, and literature is just too slow for everyday communication. So our communication is much more influenced by geopolitical view of Europe than by literature view of Europe. Football has advantages. It's also very quick in football. So when we see, I don't know, Mesut Özil playing for Germans, we can see the new Europe very quickly. And more people see Mesut Özil than read like novels from some Turkish origins written in German. But the problem is we are not speaking to each other. Nobody speaks Slovenian, so we don't know what's going on. We don't know what's happening in Ukraine. When the problem started with Ukrainian, everyone was said, "Oh, what's there with Ukraine? Is there where can we read something about it? Where can we learn something? What is going on?" We didn't know. We were searching the map to find where the Ukraine is, and then, oh, there's some Russian living there. And so. Here's my suggestion. I won't make the point. I will make the suggestion at the end. I think we have the financial crisis, but the financials I'm talking about are really small. And I think we need very quickly. We need to start communicating. And this is I think the simple way we can do that. Every nation in the Europe needs one internet page where they choose 10 texts, interviews, columns from their media and translate it to every language of Europe. That's like it. So I, as a Slovenian, can open the page, Ukrainian page, and learn and read in my language what's going on and what our Ukrainian media is writing. And also they can go to Slovenian page and read my columns or the interviews with our people. so we can start communicating. We had problems before, and she was speaking in English and you were speaking in German. That's absurd. We have all sorts of all this in Brussels. There are more translators than McDonald's, Phoenix. We are not using these advantages. We are speaking different languages. That's what you know. There are a lot of languages in Europe, and we have to find a way how to communicate fast, because the time is fast. There is a lot of words, and because we are not doing that, that's why we have this propaganda going on. That's why I'm learning what's going on in Hungary through the Reuters agency, or I'm learning what's going on in Austria and Italy through some reporters from Vienna. It's absurd, but it's the reality of Europe, and I'm afraid we writers can. We are communicating slowly, and it's very important, but I think we are not able to solve this big problem of communications, because what we are writing now, you will read in, I don't know, 10 years, maybe if I'm lucky, in my next novel is going got translated into German. Thank you.
Wie viele konstruktive Vorschläge hier in so kurzer Zeit schon gefallen sind, wie man eine europäische Öffentlichkeit herstellen kann. Laleş, über die Türkei wurde jetzt, Goran hat es immer wieder angesprochen, schon ein wenig über Özil und andere Dinge gesprochen. Kommen wir mal zu dem. Wir haben schon gehört, Sie sind Geschäftsführer und Übersetzer eines kurdischen Verlages, eine Sprache, Romanche, die ja lange verboten war in der Türkei. Hilft Literatur denn, Ihnen persönlich sich zu verorten, vor allem wenn man in einem Land lebt, wo man die Muttersprache, seine eigene Muttersprache, lange nicht sprechen durfte?
Esas bu programı düzenleyen Avrupa Edebiyat Konferansı'nı düzenleyen herkese teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Edebiyat da sanat ve kültürle ilgili olarak zaman zaman özellikle Türkçe kültürü, edebiyatı ve dinle ilişkin yaptığımız söyleşilerde konu dolaşıp dönüp politik bir mecraya geliyor. Çünkü Kürtçenin bir dil olarak, bir edebiyat olarak, bir sanat olarak sadece dilin ve sanatın içinde tartışılması neredeyse mümkün gözükmüyor. Kişisel olarak ben bundan biraz rahatsızım ama buna bir çözüm de bulmak zordur. Çünkü o temel hak ve özgürlükler tamamıyla karşılanmadığı müddetçe edebiyat, dil ve kültür politikanın kurbanı olmaya devam edecektir. Mümkün mertebe politik bir çerçevenin dışında daha çok dilsel ve kültürel bir çerçeveden meseleye bakmak istiyorum. Şu anda Kürtçe Türkiye'de yasak değil. Önce bir kere o hakkı teslim edelim. Kürtçe kamusal alanda serbest olmakla birlikte ama kendini geliştirebilecek bir takım argümanlara, araçlara tam olarak sahip değil. Belki de yapılması gereken temel şey bu araçların, bu argümanların, bu imkanların oluşturulması ve bunun oluşturulması için bir tür hak arayışının, mücadelenin ve itiraz dilinin geliştirmeye devam etmek gerekir. Esasında bunu sadece Kürtçe için istemek de doğru değil. Çünkü Türkiye'de sadece Kürtçe değil, Kürtçenin dışında Ermenice, mesela Rumca, Lazca gibi azınlıklar tarafından konuşulan ama bir takım kendini gerçekleştirebilecek, geliştirebilecek imkanlardan yoksun başka diller de var. Şimdi bir kere şunu söylemek istiyorum. Yayıncılık ve yaptığım dönemden bu yana ya da yazmaya başladığım günden bu yana hep şu soruyu sorarım kendime. Acaba bir kitap ya da yazarın kurduğu bir cümle insanın ölümünün önüne geçebilir, ölümü engelleyebilir. Çok benim için temel sorulardan biriydi. Fakat hayat deneyimi şunu öğretti bana. Bunun önüne belki geçemeyecektir ama iyi bir okur, örnek bir okur en azından bunu yaparken vicdan azabı çekecektir diye düşünüyorum. Dolayısıyla dil ve edebiyatın insanı dönüştürebileceğine, değiştirebileceğine inanıyorum. Çünkü esasında dille uğraşan, yazı yazan herkes belki kanla birbirine bağlı değildir ama dille birbirine bağlıdır. Çünkü dünyanın ortak dilidir edebiyat. Ve biz belki o ortak dil üzerinden bir işte Avrupa'nın hayali, gerçeği o ortak dil üzerinden, edebiyat üzerinden kurulabilir. Çünkü bizim diğer dünyadaki yazarlarla bir takım o akrabalığımızdan gelen ortak yaşanmışlıklarımız vardır, anılarımız vardır. Ben zaman zaman Proust'ta veyahut Almanya'daki herhangi bir yazar arkadaşımla yazdıkları üzerinden bir ortaklık, bir anlamda bir buluştuğumuz önemli noktalar olduğunu düşünüyorum. Dolayısıyla aynı toprakta doğmuş insanlarız. O toprakta edebiyattır. Belki o toprağa yeniden yoğurup şekil verilerek çoğulcu, biraz daha böyle herkesin kendini ifade edebileceği bir Avrupa yaratılabilir diye düşünüyorum.
Auch die Gemeinsamkeit, die Sie hervorgehoben haben, also dass es die Basis gibt, eine gemeinsame Basis. Was würden Sie denn sagen, gibt es ein spezielles europäisches Genre, literarisch gesehen? Sie übersetzen so viel europäische Literatur. Hat Europa ein literarisches Genre, was Besonderes ist?
Avrupa'nın bir edebi tarzı, tek tipleşmiş bir edebi tarzın olmasını arzu etmiyorum. Avrupa'da her yazarın kendine göre oluşturduğu bir yazı stili ve yazı tarzı vardır. Sanırım azınlıkların ve siyasal sınırlar içinde kaldığını düşündüğümüz bir takım dünya yazarlarının Avrupa'ya kattıklarıyla Avrupa'nın çeşitlendiğini, stil açısından, anlatım açısından, anlatı stratejisi açısından şekillendiğini, zenginleştiğini ve aynı zamanda bütün bu zenginliklerin de çeviri yoluyla kendi ana yurtlarına dönüp bambaşka bir alan, bambaşka yollar açtığını düşünüyorum. Dolayısıyla Avrupa'nın güzelliği çeşitliliğinde, renkliliğindedir. Böyle kalması arzu ederim.
In welcher Tradition verorten Sie sich denn literarisch, Sie persönlich, als Schriftsteller, Lyriker und Laleş?
Esasında bu kadar yaşadığım coğrafya o kadar gerçeküstü ki, o kadar hayal dünyasında yaşıyorum ki ayaklarımın yere bastığını çok düşünmüyorum. Çok gerçeküstü bir edebi dünyanın içinde kendimi görüyorum.
Ich würde diese Frage gerne einmal durchs Panel schicken. Wo verorten Sie sich literarisch, kulturell? Aus welcher Tradition, literarischen Tradition mehren Sie sozusagen Ihre eigene Literatur? Und dann würde ich ganz gerne öffnen. Wenn Sie Fragen haben, Anmerkungen, Bemerkungen, herzlich gern. Ja, Goran, was würden Sie sagen? Welche Erzähltradition stehen Sie?
I think my tradition is, I think for all of the European writers' tradition is firstly based in language that I speak and write in. I'm bilingual. I'm rich enough to have two languages. My mother tongue is so-called, once was called Serbo-Croatian, now they call it in every which way they like. If you are in Bosnia, they call it a Bosnian. If you are Croatian, they call it, in your Croatian, they call it Croatian. I like to call it Naški, which means our language, is politically very appropriate, correct. But this is my mother tongue, so I read, and I still read a lot of literature written in that language, and of course I write in Slovenian, so I read very much Slovenian literature and tradition, but with those traditions, they're rooted in the European tradition. So just because I'm reading, I don't know, Ivo Andrić, or on the other way, Lojze Kovačić, his mother, which is for me one of the best, maybe I think the best Slovenian writers of all time, his mother tongue was German, because he was born in Switzerland, so he's probably rooted in the tradition of German literature. And of course, Ivo Andrić has another traditions that influences him. So I think these are the reality of Europe, is this crossing of different cultures. And then before, when you ask, is there a European novel? I think the European novel it means diversity, it means openness to the world. This is what is, I think, separating Europe from the rest of the world. It is much more open to different influences. Today you have Jhumpa Lahiri writing, I don't know, in America, but she was born in London, and there is something European in how she writes. Or Amos Oz, he's from Israel, but definitely he's a European writer, and his novels, you can say, when you're reading him, they're European. You can connect with them. I can connect with them easily. That's the power of the literature. And I think that's when you're talking about European literature, that's I think the best thing there is with European literature, that it's so diverse and still you feel with them, because your tradition is also very diverse and rich, and you have this all sorts of experience, and you can read Polish writers and you find something that is very close to you as you are reading Slovenian, the Bosnian writers. So, and this for me is, I think, it makes European, and so, yes, my tradition is, of course, European.
Ist es auch Ihre Tradition, Oksana? Die europäische literarische Tradition? Und sehen Sie sich auch als Autorin in dieser Folge? Verorten Sie sich da literarisch?
Well, to begin with, I would say I do believe there is a European genre. There is such thing as a European genre, which is novel. Milan Kundera has a whole book on that, Testaments Betrayed, which is a must-read for the beginners before they decide whether it's worth all the sweat to plunge into this kind of business at all. Very pessimistic book, like everything what Kundera writes, but that is the point. Yeah, I mean, European civilization, I think, in a way can be considered, to a certain extent, the birth child of a European novel. And interestingly enough, now that you asked, and now that I can afford to be personal, what I've noticed in the past decade is that regardless of whether we communicate or rather not communicate, regardless whether we know of each other's literatures, regardless whether we have enough literature in translation in our culture, which is not the case, There are absolutely clearly cut parallels in what the writers of Eastern and Central Europe, but not only Eastern and Central Europe, work about, write about, at least in the past decade, from Sophie Oksanen's Purge in Finland to Milenko Jergovic's Sruda Sings in the Twilight at Pentecost, from Radka Denimarkova's Money from Hitler, or Thomas Medicus here in Germany, the story of my grandfather or grandfather, to my museum of abandoned secrets. We all use kind of the same patterns, trying to review or re-explore the post-war history of Europe from the standpoint of this skeleton in the closets which were left to us by the dominant historical narration. So we all live in a way in this museum of abandoned secrets, and we are all groping, each in the cell of our language, but it looks like European literature nowadays is somehow trying to diagnose some hidden diseases of the European civilization which has not yet surfaced, have not yet shown up in the media discourse.
Und Schriftsteller sind meistens die besten Experten in Sachen Krise, siehe Kafka oder Borges. Mich würde interessieren, Florence, als jemand, der auch sehr viel journalistisch über Literatur wie Sie gearbeitet hat, Sie haben ja viele Literatursendungen moderiert für das französische Fernsehen, im Radio, sehr viel geschrieben darüber, also sich auch einen Überblick verschafft über das, was es an europäischer Literatur gibt. Spüren Sie noch einen großen Unterschied zwischen Ost und West?
You mean between East and West Europe, of course. Yes? Is that what you mean?
Richtig, ja.
Yeah, no, because at the same time I was thinking of the US and the American novel that was so desperately trying to mimic sometimes. Well, that's my feeling, and I think we should not do this. We should stop mimicking the US on all fronts and try and create our own values or recreate them. But yes, talking about East and West Europe, you were asking the questions of what your sources of influence. As a writer, I am focusing on the life of the psyche and the brain. So that leads me to be interested in Henry James, who so much wanted to be European, or Virginia Woolf, or Nathalie Sarraute, or Kevin Powers. So that's not typically European, that's more human in general. But as a literary critic, yes, I do focus on European literature, and especially now on Eastern literature, because I think it's really very creative. It used to be in the past, and I keep telling my readers, do read Ivo Andrić and Pont sur l'Adrina to understand the situation of ex-Yugoslavia, or do read Imre Kertész, because nobody else will tell you better than him about Hungary, even today. Or do read Boris Pahor about Slovenia, or Erta Müller about the relationship between Germany and Romania. So I do this, and I'm not the only one to do it, and I think it's really important to bridge this gap, because we say Europe, but in fact there are two Europes, and we don't really communicate very well between the two, and there's still an invisible wall. So I'm trying to help bringing this wall down. Now my concern is who reads this? what literary critics or media in general or people who try and support literature saying this to the readers? Which impact does it have? In other words, Lal was saying that there is a common foundation. You can discuss Proust with anyone else in Europe. But my concern is, how about the younger generation? Will they discuss Proust or Ivo Andrić, or will they rather discuss Grey's Anatomy or The Wire? No, it's a real question, because really, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but when you look at statistics, youngsters read less and less. So this sort of background, which is so important to understand our history and where we come from and where we are going and who we are, I think we should not give up on this. And it's a key question for me. And another interesting thing that you raised, Goran, is this is very practical, but how about a newspaper on the web that all of us here, all the writers, could do?
Nicht in Europa lebt derzeit. Was macht das mit deinem Schreiben, diese Distanz zu Europa? Fühlst du dennoch einen großen Bezug, wenn du in den USA bist, beim Schreiben zu Europa?
Yes, I mean, for me there's no doubt I am European, though I'm very influenced by parts of the world that are non-European. But in a way I want to come back to the basic question, you know, the literary Europe and European literature, because to me it's a grey area question. I mean, we sit here with the black and the white crossing on the stars, but we lack the grey, because I can say yes and I can say no, and it'll be equally right, just depending how I argue. Because we are all influenced by our local culture, our national culture, by the European culture, but also by the world. And we're talking about how Europeans can all discuss Proust. I have discussed a lot of Proust and other European literature with Africans, with Chinese, with Americans, and gotten no less intelligent comments than I would have gotten from Europeans. And I have in my book, Europa alles ist der Film, this war surgeon from the Caribbean who says at some point in frustration about that he can never be a European, this, you know, what makes up a European? How does European smell? How does he look? How does he taste? But also, I mean, if you have to read European literature to become European, what do Europeans have to do? Because most Europeans haven't read European literature. So really thoughts belong to those who take them in, and they can come from all over the world. And in Denmark, when I started writing full-time, I thought, okay, I have to read more Danish literature and be more into what's happening now. And then I realized at some point, no, we're just 5 million people in Denmark, or 5.5 million. That's as many as in Sicily. Should the Sicilians just read Sicilian literature? No, we live in a pyramid of inspiration where we can take from all over the world, we can take from all over the world, and for each writer, it's a decision where you feel you're most inspired. My first novel was largely inspired by Latin American realism and by such Russians as Gogol. But of course there was also European line from the Nordic sagas in that. So I take in what I need to write the stories I would like to write. And we have such a wealth of world literature that it would be a pity if we limit ourselves to that definition. There's something fascistic about we have this European literature and the rest is outside. Now, it's all grey, it's mingles, but there are different nuances of the grey. And of course, there's certain things that are European tradition. But I say, it's really about communication. And the reason that they in China can read H.C. Andersen and Proust in Africa and we can read Ben Okri here is that beneath the specifics of the story, there is something universal human being communicated. And so you can learn about specificity of each culture through the actual description, the actual story, but it's what we recognize as universally humane that makes literature readable all across the world. And for me, that's where there's a universal quality in art, and literature comes in there. So anyway, I really just think it's very important to keep the picture of the grave in this.